It was Monday evening, and at 6:15 the doorbell rang, which I answered and found my cousin Ralph there. I thought it was a little strange because I'm not usually home before midnight, but then I thought Ralph must have forgotten about my schedule. I invited him into the house, bought him a beer, and then we sat and talked while watching Monday Night Football. He seemed disappointed that my wife Lois wasn't home, but she called me around 5 and said she was going to stop by after work to have a drink or two with some of her coworkers. She also told me that she would be ready for a drink when she got home. I was more than ready. It had been a little over 3 weeks since Lois and I had last made love. Lois seemed to be going through some sort of sullen period. All she did was say, "I'm too tired, I have a headache, or I had a bad day at work and my legs and back hurt." After a while, Ralph said he had to go, and I walked him to the door and said goodbye. When I looked at the clock, I saw that it was still only 8 o'clock, so I grabbed another beer and sat down in front of the TV again. Later that evening, I woke up in my chair. The beer I drank relaxed me enough that I dozed off, which I don't usually do. I got up and noticed that the Yukon was parked by the road, so Lois must have gotten home, and I wondered why she hadn't picked me up so we could get into bed and, as they say, get on with it. And finally, we got something going. She didn't say no. The next day, as I drove home, I wondered why she was so often looking for a reason to say no. No man wants to think he's not good enough for his woman, but that's what I was thinking. After we started doing this for a couple weeks, Lois asked me if I thought she was too loose. I had no idea what prompted the question, and I thought it was odd that she asked it. But I wasn't stupid, so I lied and said, "Of course not. I guess I'm just a little small for you." "You're not small at all, babe. You're just perfect for me." She was lying, and I knew it. From a guy's point of view, it was wrong. Be honest and admit that she's a little small for you, or dispense with that and say she's bigger than any other you might have had. But don't be obvious in trying to spare his feelings. I was in love with Lois, and when I finally proposed, size was obviously not an issue for her, and she accepted. And even though she married me, the thought of it'll probably work out never left my mind. Anyway, back to my attempts to wake up a sleeping Lois to try and get some love. "Oh, it's you." My disappointment at finding her in bed asleep after promising me instantly turned to incandescent anger. I'd had enough of her bullshit. "Who the hell did you think it was, you miserable bitch? What the hell is with this? Oh, it's just you bullshit? Who the hell were you having fun with behind my back?" I got off the bed, grabbed my shorts off the floor, and went downstairs. I grabbed a beer and went out on the patio and sat down to cool down a bit and think about what had just happened. It was like she wanted it, but the moment she realized it was me, she said no. The tone of her voice when she said what she said was, "Shit, that asshole again." As I sat there looking at the moon and stars, I wondered for the first time in our married life if she was really spending evenings with girls. Now I doubted it very much. Hell, was all the things she did when she was away from me really what she was talking about? My next thought was, where the hell am I going to scrape together enough money to hire a detective to find out what that bitch was doing in her spare time? Something else occurred to me as well. The bitch knew what I was thinking, judging from the way I'd yelled at her, and she didn't care enough about what I was thinking to drag herself downstairs, make excuses, and try to make amends. It was almost like, oh well, now he knows. Screw it. I didn't feel like going back upstairs, and I was already wide awake, so I decided to go back into the house and watch TV. I had a tape of last week's NCIS, so I rummaged through the tapes until I found it. It was the only blank tape in the pile, and then put it in the VCR. The video explained everything. I paused it and quietly went upstairs to see if Lois was in bed, and when I peeked in, she was already snoring softly. I went back downstairs and resumed playing the tape. I watched as my wife and my cousin Ralph entered the bedroom. I guessed from the angle of the camera that it was mounted on the top shelf in the closet. I could see almost the entire room, and it was obvious to me that the two of them had done this before. How could she do this to me, I thought, and how many times, and with how many men? It hurt. In front of me was a man I didn't seem to know well. What have I done to deserve this? "Oh, God." I heard from behind me and turning around saw Lois standing there. "Oh, God, oh, God, oh, God, oh, God," she yelled, hurriedly walking over to the phone and quickly dialing a number while humming. "Answer it, goddammit, answer it." "Answer the damn phone." Then, "Damn it, Ralph, Dave knows. He got that stupid recording you just had to make." I don't know how. You should have taken the damn thing with you when you left. You couldn't have taken it. Dave is sitting here watching it right now. I guess I knew where my NCIS tape was. I stood up and walked over to Lois, and she flinched and recoiled from me. In fact, I just snatched the phone out of her hands. Why don't you come over here and get the tape, Ralph? Just don't forget to wear your bulletproof vest when you come over. It would be very wise of you to never go near where I may be from now on. Keep in mind that I intend to attend all family events from now on, hoping and praying that you will be there as well. I won't waste any time looking for you, but rest assured, someday I will come across you, and when that day comes, it will be the worst day of your worthless life. I slammed the phone down, looked at Lois, and said, "Thanks to you and my asshole cousin, I don't have to spend money on a private investigator. The two of you handed me all the evidence I needed." I went back to the VCR, retrieved the tape and kissed it, then put it on the TV. In a trembling voice, Lois asked, "What are you going to do?" "What the hell do you think I'm going to do?" "I'm going to divorce your nasty ass." "But I don't want a divorce." I laughed. "Why the hell not? From what I've just observed, it's obvious you don't give a shit about me. Pack your things and get out of here before I lose my temper and do to you what I think you so deserve." She almost ran out of the room, and as soon as she left, I grabbed a clean tape and put it on the TV, then carried the ruined tape into the kitchen and hid it. After making coffee, I sat down at the kitchen table and started making a list of things I had to do in the morning. We didn't live in a state that had a no-fault rule, but I knew that courts generally went by a 50-50 ratio when dividing property, unless infidelity or crime was the cause. The adultery came as a surprise to me since I had the tape. I'd inherited the house from my parents, and I'd been meaning to add Lois to the list of possessions for a long time, but thank goodness I never got around to it. As I was working on the list, I heard Lois coming down the stairs, and then a couple minutes later, the front door opening and closing. I wondered where she could have gone at 2 in the morning, but then I didn't care at all. I only wondered how one could go from love to hate in a matter of seconds or minutes. I looked over the list, and thanks to the internet, something could be done right now. I got up and headed to my room, and as I walked through the living room, I noticed that the blank tape I had put on the TV was gone, and I smiled. I just hoped she decided she had the damn tape and didn't watch it to make sure. If things worked out the way I expected and hoped they would, I could break the relationship up her ass. Once in my room, I sat down at my computer and did some online banking. I transferred all but $10 from our joint account to a savings account that was in my name only. I had that account when I married Lois, and she had her own when we got married, and we never got around to combining them. Then I got into the credit card business. I was paying bills online, so I logged in and canceled joint accounts. I had American Express and Visa in my name only, so I left them alone. I called in the morning and checked to see if the accounts were closed. Satisfied that I had done everything I could to protect myself, I went to bed and, oddly enough, slept soundly. The alarm clock woke me up at 7, and by 7:45 I was dressed and out of the house. After having breakfast at Tricacci's, I headed to the bank to be there at 9 when the doors opened. From the restaurant, I called work and told the receptionist I'd be late, and she said my wife had called me and wanted me to call her. Not much chance of that, I thought as I hung up. When the bank opened, I rented a safe deposit box in my name only, and then moved everything from the box Lois had access to into my new one. Finished with that, I headed to the office where Myra, my secretary, handed me a handful of message sheets and told me that Lois was still trying to contact me. I told Myra that Lois and I were going through a divorce and I shouldn't take any messages from her. Myra then told me that Alan wanted to see me as soon as I got to work. I went to my boss's office and Shirley, his personal assistant, told me to go straight there. "You picked a bad time to be late," he told me as I walked through the door. "I need you on the next flight to Atlanta. Morgan's company is refusing to sign a new contract, and I need you to go there and settle things." I told him it wasn't a good time for me to leave and explained why. "I need to get a restraining order to keep Lois away from me in the house, as well as change the locks. If I don't, she might steal the house while I'm gone. Give me your keys and I'll get it done. You can use the services of Bert Ellsworth. He was my lawyer when I got divorced and did a hell of a job for me. I'll call him and tell him to expect your call. Call him on the way to the airport. Shirley has reserved tickets for you, and you can pick them up at the Delta counter." I couldn't refuse. It was a great job and paid very well, so I had to go to Atlanta whether I wanted to or not. I hurried home, packed my bag, made sure the phone answering machine was on, and headed for the airport. On the way, I called the number of the lawyer Alan had given me and asked for Ellsworth. When I gave the receptionist my name, she immediately put me through to him. I explained the situation and told him what I wanted to do. He gave me some advice and I gave him my visa number so he would stay. At the airport, I went through the usual TSA shenanigans, got to the Delta counter, checked in, and sat in the boarding area to wait for my flight to be called. Sitting there, I pondered what the lawyer had told me. I lied and told Ellsworth that I needed the warrant because I overheard Ralph tell Lois that if I gave her a scandal after finding out they were having fun, he'd make me straighten up. I'll beat that little wuss until he comes to his senses, is what I said to Ellsworth. And then I said I heard Lois say, "That's great. Can I watch and maybe give him a once-over or two?" Of course, it was all a lie, and it wouldn't come out at the plea hearing, but if it would keep Lois out of the house until I got back, I'd lie to the last one. I've earned that right after listening to all the lies she's told me, while entertaining Ralph and God and Lois know how many others. Ellsworth said it wouldn't be hard to get a restraining order, but there would be a hearing in 10 days, at which I'd have to convince a judge to make the order permanent. The trip to Atlanta proved helpful as I solved the problem within an hour of meeting with the Morgans people, called Alan, and told him we had a signed contract. He told me that he had called a locksmith and that the locks on the house had been changed. Also, my son-in-law is a deputy sheriff and he will watch the house until you return. While I was in Atlanta, I made a courtesy visit to 2 other customers before boarding flight 720 home. While waiting for my flight to be called, I remembered that I had turned off my cell phone during the courtesy calls and hadn't turned it back on. When I did, I discovered that I had 6 missed messages and 3 voicemails. 1 message and 1 voicemail were from Ellsworth, and all the others were from Lois. I deleted her messages and listened to the voicemails. They were the same. "Call me. We need to talk before things get out of hand." The voicemail message from Ellsworth said he'd managed to get into court in the afternoon and get a protective order. He would serve it on Lois at her place of employment the next morning. I had to thank Alan for recommending Ellsworth. I arrived home at midnight, and as I got out of the car, a man got out of a car parked at the curb and approached me. He identified himself as a sheriff's deputy and asked for identification. "You must be Alan's brother-in-law," I said, as I pulled out my wallet and showed him my driver's license, then thanked him for watching the house. He handed me a ring and a pair of keys and said, "Brian asked me to tell you that all the locks in the house are locked with the same keys, so you only need 1 key to get into all the locked doors. Your wife showed up here at 4:30 and again at 9. She got very angry when I wouldn't let her in the house. She threatened to call the police if I didn't let her in. She was a little surprised when I showed her my badge and told her the cops were already here. Once inside the house, I noticed the answering machine light blinking, but I was beat, so I turned the phone off and went to bed. In the morning, after showering, shaving, and getting dressed, I listened to the messages on the answering machine, and to my surprise, they were all from Lois, and the content was basically the same. "Call me before you do anything rash." It's too late, honey, I thought. Too late. When I got to work, Myra told me that Lois had called again, and Myra told her that she had been told not to connect with Lois and that she wasn't even supposed to take messages from Lois. She hasn't called since. I leaned over and kissed Myra on the forehead and said, "I don't know what I'd do without you." She laughed and said, "I bet you say that to all the girls." I went into Alan's office and filled him in on the Morgan situation and thanked him for solving the lock problem at my house and sending me to Ellsworth. "What's next for you?" he asked. "Get on with my life. Try to find a nice woman who will put up with me. You'll do fine. It'll be hard the first couple months, but then things will get better." I went to my office and got down to business. At 9, I called Ellsworth, and he told me that the papers would be filed by 10 and that he could serve them to Lois before lunch if I wished. I told him to proceed. At 10 without noon, Lois stopped by my office and invited me to have lunch with her. I needed a break, so I agreed. We went to Tricacci's, took the available seats, and after Mandy took our order, Myra asked, "How's it going?" "Fine." "Why?" "My older brother and sister are divorced, and I know how hard it is when you're just starting to go through that process, and I know that having someone who isn't involved that you can talk to can make it easier. Are you applying for this job? Someone has to cheer you up, so who better than me? Cheer me up? Yeah, I think that's something I could really use right now. Myra reached into her purse, pulled out a piece of paper, and held it out to me, saying, "Today's attempt to cheer you up." I looked at the paper and saw that it was a list of names. What is it? A list of girls who are interested in you now that you're back on the market. I flipped through the list and saw a couple surprises. Liz Fisher? The red-headed beauty from accounting? I thought she was engaged. Last I heard, the wedding is happening next month. She caught him cheating and kicked him out. And you think she's interested in me? I know she is. She once said she'd snatch you up in a heartbeat if you were single. I looked at the list again. There were 7 names on the list, and besides Mary, there were 2 others that might interest me. Are you saying you know they're all interested? I've heard each of them express interest in you a couple times. I smiled and said, I noticed your name wasn't on the list. I thought about putting it on there, but under the circumstances, I decided I'd rather not. Why? Other than the obvious fact that I'm married and you know it? Of course. You've just admitted that you've been thinking about it. The answer is that you are just beginning to go through a divorce caused by your wife cheating on you. I figured that under those circumstances, dating a married woman who plays is the last thing on your mind. You gamble? I thought you and Harold were on solid ground. We were until I found out he was playing around with the secretary in his office. Instead of getting a divorce, I decided to maintain a comfortable lifestyle and repay him with kindness. You are wrong about one thing. Knowing you were married and playing around would not have stopped me. You should have put your name on the list. You'd be the perfect woman for me right now. Now I realize you're kidding. I'm far from the perfect woman. That's where you're wrong. There are 3 names on your list that I'm interested in, but you have one characteristic that they don't have. And what, pray tell, is that? You are married and they are not. Now that's something you'll have to explain. Right now, an emotional connection is the last thing I need. It would be too easy to get emotionally involved with the 3 on your list that I'm interested in. On the other hand, you're already engaged, and by your own admission, you'd like to play tit for tat with your husband. If I were to get busy with you, there would be no emotional component. We'd just be buddies with benefits. Are you serious? Seriously? Of course I am. Don't get me wrong, honey. I'm not the kind of man who would go after a married woman and try to seduce her. But the one who let me know she was free? In a moment, my dear, in a moment. What would you say about a long lunch then? I'd be all for it. Do we have time today? Not today. I have a meeting with the Hayes people at 2, but I have a clear schedule for tomorrow. It's a date. Was it hypocritical of me to entertain another woman while married to Lois, and considering I'd kicked her out for cheating? Absolutely not. According to Ellsworth, Lois had to have the papers by the time I had lunch with Myra, and once Lois got the divorce papers, we would legally part ways, and I would be free to do whatever I wanted. At 2:45, my cell phone rang. I looked at the screen and saw that it was Lois, and knowing that it was probably because she had been served with papers, I decided to take the call. What do you need? No greeting, just, what do you need? I was tempted to say, what the hell do you want, bitch? But I figured she already knew how I felt about her. Why can't I get into the house, and what the hell is up with this divorce, and why aren't my credit cards working? And the protection order? Are you out of your mind? No, just out of my mind. Your cards aren't working because one of the things you do when you get rid of a whore wife is cancel her credit cards. And the reason you can't get into the house is because you don't live there anymore, and I don't want you in it. You need to stop this nonsense, Dave. You can't seriously want to lose half of everything you have because I had a little sex on the side. That's all it was, Dave. Just recreational entertainment. There was no love involved. I only love you. I don't see it that way, Lois. As far as I'm concerned, you're a whore who's cheating on me, and that's why I filed the complaint, using adultery as the reason. We need to talk. We need to sit down face to face and talk about this, Dave. I think I surprised her when I said, okay. Where and when? Tonight at 10? I don't think so. I kicked you out of the house and I'm not letting you back in. You can't keep me out of the house, Dave. Of course I can. The house belongs to me, Lois. You're not on the title. My parents left the house to me, not me and you. I'll let you in to get the rest of your stuff, but only after my lawyer prepares things, so someone from the court will be there to make sure you don't take anything you're not entitled to. Why don't we forget all this legal stuff and just sit down and work it out? I said I'm willing to talk to Lois, just not in this house. You're being completely unreasonable, Dave. If not in the house, then where? Tomorrow night at Angelina's restaurant at 6 o'clock. We can take a booth in the back and that will give us plenty of privacy. I closed the phone to end the conversation, wondering if Lois really thought I was stupid enough to buy into bullshit like, it was just sex with him. I only love you. Even as the thought crossed my mind, I knew the answer was in the affirmative. And why wouldn't she think I was stupid? I was stupid enough to let her get away with what she had done for years and years. That evening, after coming home from work, I stopped by the landing strip lounge to have a drink or two and drown my sorrows. Also, since it was a Wednesday, it was open mic night, and I thought maybe one or two comedians could make me laugh and lift my spirits. I took a seat at the bar and Karen, seeing me, came over and asked, "The usual, Dave?" "I don't know, honey. I usually order a PBR and a date with you, and so far I've only gotten a beer. I keep telling you, Dave, I have a keeper and I'm going to stick with it." I guess it's just PBR then. On the elevated bandstand, a woman tried her hand at stand-up comedy. A surveyor stopped by Will's farm in eastern Minnesota and announced he had some bad news. "I have discovered that your farm is not in Minnesota. It is actually located in Wisconsin." Will let out a huge sigh of relief and said, "That's the best news I've gotten in a while. I was just telling my wife this morning that I don't think I could stand another winter in Minnesota." She laughed and continued, "The New York City Department of Education reports that only 26% of the city's 3rd through 8th graders passed the English exam. But on the other hand, they're too bad at math to realize how bad it is." She laughed politely at that story, but struck back with the next one. A new pastor was visiting the homes of his parishioners. In one of the houses, it was obvious someone was home, but no one answered his repeated knocks. So he took out a card, wrote Revelation chapter 3, verse 20 on the back, and taped it to the door. The next Sunday, when the offering was processed, he found that his card had been returned. On it was written, Genesis chapter 3, verse 10. Taking out his Bible, he checked the quote and burst into laughter. Revelation chapter 3, verse 20 begins, "Behold, I stand at the door and knock." Genesis chapter 3, verse 10 says, "I heard your voice in the garden and was afraid because I was naked." There were 2 more good comedians after her, and I left the place feeling much better than when I went there. Perhaps there is some truth to the old saying, laughter is the best medicine. The next day at work, no sooner had I sat down at my desk than Myra reminded me that we had a lunch date. It was a pretty busy morning, and at 11:30 Myra and I headed out for lunch. As we drove to the Marriott, I asked her if she really wanted to have lunch first, and she laughed and said, "Entertaining on a full stomach slows me down a bit. I registered us as Mr. and Mrs. Ralph Tomlinson. I thought it was quite appropriate to use Lois's ass-loving name." Once in the room, we jumped on the bed and got down to it. The rest of the day went by quickly, and now it was time to head to Angelina's to meet Lois. I got there first and took a booth in the back of the room. It was the farthest from the dance floor, and therefore the quietest. I ordered my usual dish and settled in to wait for Lois. Lois showed up 5 minutes later, and as usual, looked good. Normally, seeing her like this would instantly make me wooden, but knowing what she had done to me in my marriage killed that urge. She sat down at the table, and when the waitress came over and asked Lois what she wanted to drink, Lois ordered her usual Cosmo and had an extremely annoyed expression on her face when I told the waitress, "Separate checks, please." I sipped my beer, then said, "Okay, Lois, you called this meeting, so have your say." Frankly, Dave, you could have been a little more polite. Considering the circumstances, Lois, You're lucky I haven't destroyed you yet. You wanted to talk, so go ahead or I'll get up and leave. She sighed and said, You're overreacting to things, Dave. We don't need to get divorced. I love you, always have and always will. And the story with Ralph means nothing to me. Yes, I did it with him, but that's all it was, just sex. Most of the time, I don't even like him. He's never been a threat to you or our marriage. If he means nothing to you, why did you neglect me to take care of him? I never did. Of course you did. Think back over the last 6 months. How often have you done me, most often reluctantly, favors? Hell, think back to the last 3 weeks. I've listened to your excuses night after night and stayed out of it, all the while you've been having fun with someone else. And that's what you call loving me and only me? It hasn't been that long. It sure as hell has. For 3 weeks you've been avoiding me, and when you finally tell me I'll be lucky to have you home, you go straight to bed and fall asleep. When I tried to start something, you were all for it until you realized it was me. Remember that, Lois? Remember that, oh, it's you. I'm tired. Leave me alone. Lois, that says it all. That, oh, it's just you, said it all. And then that tape was the final nail in the coffin. Then why are you even saying these things to Ralph? Because Ralph likes to hear it. He has some whiny need to hear that he's so much better than you. I say these things to stroke his ego. There's absolutely nothing wrong with you as a lover, Dave. You've always given me pleasure. Then why do you have fun with other men? It's not other men, Dave, it's only Ralph. So you don't think it's cheating on me since there's only Ralph? That's not what I said. It doesn't matter, Lois. 1 man or 100, but having fun with a man who isn't your husband is cheating, no matter how you look at it. Answer me this, Dave. Until you saw that tape, wouldn't you say we had a good marriage? Maybe good, but certainly not great. I dated Ralph before we were even married, and it didn't affect our marriage in any way. Did you entertain my asshole cousin before we even said I do? Yes, I was. Then why the hell did you marry me in the first place? Because I love you, Dave. I don't even like Ralph nearly enough. Then why the hell are you having fun with him? Because he gives me something you can't. Sighs, Dave. Why don't you look at it as Ralph just helping you with me? You're out of your mind if you think you can convince me of that. If that's all you want to talk about, then we're done. I started to get up and she said, You'll never be able to sell adultery to Dave. You don't have any evidence to back that up. You're forgetting that I have the tape you and Ralph so kindly made for me. Are you sure? Of course I'm sure, I said, and walked away from her. On my way out the door, I smiled. Apparently, she hadn't looked at the tape she'd taken from home, so she didn't know she had a blank one. I was just reaching for the car door handle when I heard the click of heels and turned to see Lois half walking and half running in her high heels. I was amazed that she could move so fast in them. She hurried toward me and said, I need to get into the house, Dave. I need my clothes and things. I knew when I said this that I was being an asshole, but I genuinely thought I had the right to be one when I said, Have your lawyer call my lawyer to set it up, I said as I got in the car. I rolled down the window saying, Bye, Lois, and drove off when she exclaimed, Wait, Dave. Wait a minute. I could have let her follow me home and get my stuff. It wouldn't have hurt me, but I'm afraid at that moment I was thinking, screw that bitch. If she didn't already have a lawyer, it would take her a day or two to find one. And since it was Thursday, I was willing to bet that the quickest she could find one would be Monday, and then it would take another day to arrange to get her to the house. By then, I'd have all her stuff in garbage bags and wouldn't use reasonable care in doing so. If I was lucky, she would have to take it all to the dry cleaner or laundromat before she could use them. Was I a little bit embittered with Lois? No. Everything was sunshine and roses in my relationship with Lois. I got a good night's sleep that night. I had another long lunch with Myra on Friday, and at the end of a rather busy period, Myra asked me if I had plans for the weekend. When I replied that I didn't, she asked, Would you like to spend the weekend with me? I'd love to, but how will you be able to hide it from your hubby? He's going fishing this weekend. He packed the car this morning and will be leaving right from work. I'm at your disposal from today until noon on Sunday. That's if you need me. Silly girl. Let's see. Dinner and dancing tonight. Go home and play. Wake up Saturday morning and play most of the day. Dinner and dancing Saturday night and then go home and play. Wake up Sunday and play until noon and then go to brunch. Sound about right? Everything except dancing. I suggest we play more and dance less. That won't work. Yours never wears out, and mine needs a rest sometimes. All right, then. I think we stick to your plan. We went back to work, and as we left, I told her I'd pick her up at 7. Pack for the weekend, I told her, because I'm not going to have you back until Sunday. When I got home, I found that Lois had decided not to waste any time looking for a lawyer. When I went up to the bedroom to change, I saw that part of Lois's dressing room was empty. I looked around and saw that most of her other things were gone. I went on a search to find out how it had gotten there. It didn't take long to find it. One of the windows in the family room facing the patio was broken. There was nothing I could do about it. Calling the police would have been a waste of time since I couldn't prove Lois had done it. I did get a little satisfaction, though. There was some blood on the shards of glass. Lois must have cut herself climbing inside. I flipped through the yellow pages, found a glass company, called them, and made an appointment for the next day. Then I decided to leave the mess until morning, and decision made, I went upstairs, showered, and dressed for my date with Myra. We had dinner and then went dancing and drinking. We went to bed at 11, but didn't fall asleep until 3, and believe me, I was tired as hell when Myra was done with me. I set my watch for 9, since the glass company said it would be between 10 and 12. I didn't have to worry about the clock because Myra woke me up at 7:20 in the most marvelous way. While waiting for the glazier, I cleaned up the broken glass and was just finishing when the glazier came in at 10:10. He finished at 10:40, and by 11, Myra and I were at Tricacci's for a late breakfast. After Jared took our order, I asked Myra what she'd like to do after lunch. Hang out. Love. Cuddle. I can do that. And that's exactly what we did. Our mood was elevated, and by 5, we decided we'd call for pizza and just continue what we'd been doing most of the day. We decided not to play on a full stomach, so we settled down on the couch and watched TV for an hour or two, and then in the middle of the program, the TV viewing was interrupted. Sunday morning came the realization that I would have to give her back to her husband. With that realization came a thought, and over pancakes at the Village Inn, I asked, "How much time do I have?" "What do you mean?" "How soon are you going to leave me?" "What makes you think I'll leave you?" "From the way you told me you were flirting with your hubby, I was under the impression that you were just doing it here and there and not in a long-term relationship with anyone." "Maybe, but it was never my choice. Usually the guy I hooked up with ended up getting a little possessive and wanted me to leave Harold for him. The problem was that they weren't in Harold's class. None of them could keep me in the lifestyle I enjoyed as Harold's wife. I just couldn't imagine leaving a nice house in a nice neighborhood to live in a one-bedroom apartment and spend my time wondering if we'd be able to pay this month's bills. Besides, most of them weren't any better in bed than Harold, and they were also messy. At least that's the way I looked at it. They had to be dirty if they molested a married woman, and I always wore my rings. I don't understand the logic. You went out on the street to get hit on, and you knew they knew you were married when you went out with them. True, but I wasn't looking to replace Harold. I just wanted to get even. Just because I held on to them, if they were any decent in bed, didn't mean I cared that much about them. Admit it. If they started stalking me knowing I was married, do you think I could ever trust them if I made the relationship permanent? So I'm just another dirtbag? Don't be silly. Of course you're not. I've been working for you for over 5 years now, and in all that time, you've never once flirted with me. Think about what brought us here, love. I kind of gave you an engraved invitation. You told me straight out that you'd never pursue a married woman, and you didn't. I offered, and you had the good sense not to refuse. If anything will do, it's that you'll leave me. I can promise you that if I do, it won't be soon. Do we have time for one more before I have to take you home? She smiled broadly and we drove off. When I went to bed Sunday night, I was one of the most satisfied men in the state and maybe even in the neighborhood. As I drove to work on Monday, I thought about my relationship with Myra and realized that it couldn't continue, at least not in the way it had continued over the weekend. I was suing Lois, using adultery as the basis, and if she hired a lawyer, One of his first acts, if he was worth anything, would be to find something on me that she could parry. If she couldn't counter with anything, I would be on the winning side of the property division. If I got caught with Myra, Lois could counter with something, but there was no way I was going to do without it for as long as the divorce would take. I'd already gone without for so long while I was married to my whore wife. When I got to work, I called Myra into my office and laid out the problem and asked her if she had any ideas. A couple, but I don't know if you can do it. Tell me and let's see. You have 3 uncomfortable customer chairs here. You need to put a comfortable couch in here so they can sit on it. I can do that. Then you often stay late at work, so naturally I'll have to stay late to help you. After we set up the new couch, you'll leave, and I'll wait 10 or 15 minutes to give those who might be watching you enough time to follow you so they won't see me leave. That should work. Another option, I'll leave for lunch before you, go to the hotel, get a room, and call you with the room number. When you get to the hotel, take the elevator to the 2nd floor where all the conference rooms are, and then take the stairs to the floor where the room is. However, we will not be able to do this very often. There's a limit to how many conferences you can attend without making people wonder. What's to stop them from going up to make sure I'm at a conference? Put a Do Not Disturb sign on one of the conference room doors before they come up the stairs, but it doesn't matter. They'll need to see us together, and if we come and go separately, we'll be fine. I told Myra to plan the conference the next day and then sent her off to work. I had a busy day, so I didn't get around to ordering the couch until around 4. I didn't waste time going through channels to get it approved. I just ordered it and paid for it myself. At 5, I called Myra into my office and told her that she had to tell her husband that she would have to stay late at work on Thursday. They'll deliver the couch around noon. How did you manage to make arrangements with Ahern and accounting so quickly? I didn't use them. I bought it myself. She looked around, saw no one, the door to the office was open, and kissed me. Then she said, I was hoping I wouldn't have to wait until Thursday. Have you already forgotten about tomorrow's conference with the Ajax guys? Shit! How did it slip my mind? I was in a good mood all the way home, but when I pulled up to the house and saw Lois parked in the driveway, the good mood faded. She had parked in the middle, so I couldn't drive past her to get into the garage. I parked so she would have room to pull out. When I got out of my car, she got out of hers and then came over to me and said, We need to talk, Dave. Things are getting out of hand. I ignored her and walked past her to her car. Opening the door, I climbed inside and grabbed her purse, which she had left on the seat. I turned it upside down and dumped the contents on the seat. I picked up her purse, took all the money out of it, counted it, put it in my pocket, and tossed the purse on the seat on top of the rest of the junk. You still owe me $14 for the broken window, and we don't need to talk. I already told you everything I wanted to. Damn it, Dave, I love you and I don't want a divorce. We can work things out. It doesn't have to be over for us. No, Lois. There's no way we can stay together, especially after I found out you were stabbing me in the back before we were even married. It's over between us, Lois. Finished. Kaput? I was hoping you'd listen to reason, but I guess deep down I knew you wouldn't. If you're determined to get a divorce, I'll have to fight you. I will not accept adultery. I know how this state works, and I won't accept a 70/30th division of property when I get the smaller portion. I'm sorry you don't see fit to punish yourself for what you did to me, but adultery still stands. You'll have to prove it, Dave, and you can't. It'll be your word against mine, and I'll deny it all the way to hell and back. I'll say you're just trying to cheat me out of my fair share of our property. You might even be punished for it. You seem to forget that I have visual proof that you have been committing adultery with my asshole cousin. No, Dave, I haven't forgotten. I snatched that tape as I was leaving the house and then destroyed it. It'll be your word against mine, and with no proof, you'll lose. You destroyed it? Ralph will never forgive you. He needed that tape so badly. He might even get so mad at you for destroying it, he'll stop being interested in you. Can you get it into your head that I don't care about Ralph? Yes, I wanted what he had, but I don't need it. I need you. I shrugged and said, You still owe me $14 for the window, stepped away from her, and went into the house. That shit doesn't give up that easily. She banged on the door and rang the bell for a good 10 minutes before she finally left. As I watched her walk back down the driveway, I smiled. She had obviously destroyed the tape without looking at it to make sure it was the right one. She had a surprise waiting for her. I wanted her to hire a lawyer and fight the divorce. I wanted her to go into debt, spend $1,000 or more on lawyers, and then find out that I still had the tape and that she had wasted her money. I slept soundly that night. My Tuesday conference call with the Ajax people went well, and I was in a pretty good mood when I got home from work. Things weren't too bad on Wednesday either, as Myra wanted to have a quick shag with me on my desk at the end of the workday. After quickly checking to make sure everyone had left, I agreed, and when we were done, I reminded her that she had to work late on Thursday. On the way home, I decided to stop by my favorite restaurant, Landing Strip Lounge. I had forgotten that it was having an open mic night on Wednesday night, and when I got there, I had a hard time finding an empty seat. Finally, a seat at the bar became available, and I took it. I happened to be there just as Bobby Denton handed the microphone to a trailer repair mechanic who worked for Triple T Sales and Service in Franktown. There was a guy who lived there, and he was pretty smart. He had degrees in electrical engineering and mechanical engineering, and one day as he was driving home, he heard a commercial on the radio that he realized was an outright lie. He thought about it, and when he got home, he sat in his room and sketched out a plan for a liar robot. When he was satisfied with his plan, he went down to his basement workshop and began to build it. It took 6 weeks, and when it was finished, he was ready for testing. It happened that the robot was standing with him in his living room when his 14-year-old son came home 2 hours late. The man asked his son why he was so late. The son replied that he had been playing cards with his buddies and had lost track of time. There was a break in the action. I finished my beer and headed home. The next day, 2 good things happened. First, my lawyer called and said that Lois's lawyer had contacted him and told him that she was going to fight the divorce. That made me smile. Second, my black leather couch was delivered. I had chosen leather because I expected to clean the semen stains that would inevitably show up on it. It turned out to be a wise move on my part because Myra and I left a few stains on it later that afternoon. The next few weeks flew by. Myra and I did it 3 or 4 times a week, mostly on the couch after work. But 3 times we did it in the conference room because, let's face it, just as the couch was better than the desk, the bed was better than the couch. Also, Lois had called me almost daily during this period, telling me that she needed me and telling me that I just couldn't win. So why not just accept everything as the past, forget it, and move on together? I could have put an end to these calls by buying a new cell phone with a different number and changing the number on my home phone. But I took some kind of perverse pleasure in telling her she was wasting her time. In doing so, I knew she had no idea what was coming at her. Meanwhile, Ellsworth and the lawyer Lois had hired were spending their time figuring things out. I hoped that Myra's lawyer was being paid by the hour and couldn't help but foot her bill. I'd negotiated a flat fee with Ellsworth, so I didn't care how long this whole thing dragged on. Ellsworth knew about the tape. In fact, he had it in his possession, but he never told Lois's attorney of its existence. They haggled back and forth, with the other lawyer arguing that Lois would stop fighting for a divorce if I changed the grounds from adultery to irreconcilable differences and agreed to an equal division of property. To give Lois some hope, I told Ellsworth that he could reduce the price from 70/30ths to 65/35ths, knowing full well that she would not agree to that. Ellsworth told me that he would have to put the opposition on notice of the existence of the tapes before going before the judge. He said the judge would be furious, very furious, if we didn't make every attempt to settle before we appeared before him. I told Ellsworth to use his discretion. What the hell? That's what I was paying him to do, right? Lois had really put someone onto me, or at least I was sure she had. I suddenly saw a guy next to me that I'd never seen before. I never noticed him looking at me, but he seemed to be around wherever I was. Maybe it was my paranoia, but then again, maybe not. Another week passed and I got a call from Ellsworth. Lois and her lawyer wanted to meet. I told him to schedule it and let me know the time. He called me back and said Friday at 10 in the morning. I was there at 9:30 and discussed everything with Bert. We decided that the tape would be at the meeting, but I wanted to mess with Lois one last time. The meeting started with the usual nonsense. Lois denied the adultery and said I was being unreasonable. Then I said, "You keep forgetting that I have a tape that you and my asshole cousin made." "No, I don't." "You have nothing to prove your assertion and you know it." "I'll tell you what I'll do, Lois. If you sign the papers right now, I'll agree to a 60/40th split. That offer is valid for the next 2 minutes. If you don't sign, I assume the judge will determine the amount of the share himself. I won't agree, Dave. You have no proof. Sure, Lois, I have a tape of you and Ralph. And then Lois did what I was hoping she would do. She got pissed off and let her mouth hang open. Damn it, Dave. I already told you I destroyed the damn tape. Oh? So you admit you committed adultery and then destroyed the evidence? Her eyes got big as she realized what she'd just said. No. That's not what I meant. Never mind, Lois. I offered to cut you some slack, but you, as usual with your pig-headedness, rejected my offer. Let the courts decide. Lois's attorney then spoke. If you do have evidence, you'd better get it out in the open right now. I nodded to Ellsworth, and as he went to hit the play button on the TV VCR standing at the end of the table, I said, Last chance, Lois. I'll settle for 60/40ths, but as soon as he hits the play button, the offer is off and we'll go to court. Screw you, Dave. You don't have anything to use. Bert hit the play button and I stood up saying, See you in court, Lois, and left the room. I hadn't even gotten out of the building yet when my phone rang. It was Bert. They want to make a deal. No thanks. I gave her a way out, but she didn't take it, so full steam ahead. All I did was increase the number of phone calls from Lois. I had disconnected the house phone, and Myra knew not to transfer calls from Lois to me, so the only way Lois could reach me was on my cell phone. I kept the cell phone and the number to mess with Lois. It tickled me to see the number of calls from her that I never answered. As for my life, Myra was giving me almost more than I could handle, but I wasn't going to complain. 3 days after the meeting with Lois and the lawyers, Myra said, We have a problem, a very big problem. Oh, shit. I thought, her hubby found out about us. How bad is it? I asked. Pretty bad. Harold has to fly back to Ohio to settle something about his parents' inheritance. He'll be gone for a week. So what's the problem? How are we going to spend a week together? I thought for a minute, then said, Easy. You leave work a half hour before me and drive to my house. You park a block away, and then you go inside and make sure all the curtains and blinds are tightly closed. And when I get home, we'll play. I leave for work in the morning, and if I'm being followed, it will pull them with me. You wait 10 or 15 minutes to let me free, and then you leave and come to work. We'll repeat this until the weekend, and then we'll come up with another plan. How about a weekend plan like this? I do the same thing I do all week, except on Friday when you get home, we just don't leave the house all weekend. Do you think you can handle 2.5 days with me? What I'm not sure of, honey, is if I can survive 2.5 days with you. We won't know until we try. So we did, and I managed to get through the weekend, but the weekend, as good as it was, made me get a little moody when it was over, and Myra went home to meet hubby when he got back. I was too used to Myra. Among other things, she was good company, and we got along great, but I knew myself well enough to know that once my divorce was final, I would be looking for a replacement for Lois. I liked being married. I wanted to have a fulfilling relationship. I wanted to be able to fall asleep at night in the arms of a woman who would be there for me in the morning when I woke up. I could well imagine being able to have that with Myra, but Myra never made it clear that she would ever leave Harold. I always got the feeling that she was happy with him, except for his picking on her, and was willing to stay with him as long as she could repay him in kind. I remembered the list she had shown me that had sparked our affair and mentally went over it. There were 3 men on it, but none of them were fit to be my wife. 2 of them smoked and I didn't, and living with my parents, I knew I couldn't live with a smoker. Both my parents smoked 2 packs a day, and the house always smelled like a wet ashtray. Everything smelled. Clothes, furniture, curtains, and the list goes on and on. The only non-smoker was Liz from accounting. She was the prettiest of the 3, but I thought she was too young for me, and the age difference meant we were unlikely to have enough common ground to work with. I stopped by her office once to clarify a point on one of my expense reports, and she was listening to rap music, which I can't stand. It might be fun to play with Liz for a while, but I can't imagine we could make it last. These were the thoughts that visited me as I drove to work on Monday. Once at work, I was too busy to spend time thinking about personal issues. I was so busy that I had to say no when Myra peeked into the office and asked if we were going to lunch. Just before I left work, I got a call from Bert Ellsworth. He said Lois was desperate to solve the problem. I know it's all about hammering it out for you, but I think you'd be wise to offer her 60/40ths to sign right now. I know that in most cases, adultery plays a big role in getting the injured party a larger share of the assets, but 2 out of 7 divorce judges are women, and they usually offer 50/50 regardless of the reason, and we might just be unlucky enough to pull one of those. I think it would be in your best interest to settle. I thought about it for about 30 seconds and then told him to offer her 65/35ths and see if she would accept. During the layoff, Myra came into the office and said, "I didn't get my long lunch, so can I at least have some time on the couch?" She could and agreed. The next morning at 10 o'clock, Ellsworth called to say that Lois had accepted the 65/35ths offer. He said she would be in on Wednesday at 5 to sign the papers and asked for a brief meeting with me. I didn't see any use for it, except that it would give me another chance to sass her, but I wanted to get it over with so I didn't have to drag Myra around anymore. I told Bert I'd be there at 2 o'clock and get her the meeting she wanted. We walked to the conference room and I sat in a chair and waited for her to say her word. She saw that I wasn't going to say anything, so she took a deep breath and said, "I don't want this, Dave. I know you don't believe that, but I love you. Maybe we can work things out somehow and stay together?" "No way, Lois. Not after I found out how long you've been doing this. I'm going to be honest with you. If you had a brief affair with someone, I might be okay with it. Say you had several idiots before you got married, and then you were a faithful wife for years until you somehow remembered one idiot and had a brief affair with him, I might be able to get over that. But a permanent affair before we even said yes to each other? Not a chance in hell, Lois. There's no way we can deal with this. The guy you say you barely like, you give him love, and the man you profess to love can go 3 weeks to 2 months without love? It doesn't help, Lois, it just doesn't. That's it? That's all you have to say? Please, Dave. Please give us a chance. I can't do that, Lois. I'll never be able to trust you again, and I don't want to live like this. I stood up and walked to the door. Turning around, I said, "You're a good-looking woman, Lois, so I doubt you'll be alone for long. If you do meet someone, I can only hope he screws you as much as you screwed me." I left the room and headed to the landing strip. I took a seat at the bar and Karen came over, put a PBR in front of me and said, "Where have you been hiding, handsome?" "Going through a divorce and not feeling all that social. Thought I'd stop in for a beer or two and unwind." "Divorce? Does that mean I'll be able to woo you with my charms?" "I thought you'd be ready by now. I've been flirting with you for years, and you always told me how great you were with your boyfriend." "Ha! I was doing great, but only because I thought he was something he wasn't." I'd had enough and waved for Karen to pay my bill. She took my money, and when she came back with the change, she smiled at me and said, "When this divorce is finalized, don't forget about me, okay?" "I can do that. Take care of yourself," and I headed for home in a damn good mood. Karen was interested in me? Who would have thought it? Once Lois signed the papers, the deed was done, and even though there was a final decision to wait for, I could move on with my life. For me, that meant freedom from worrying about being watched. Myra and I could stop sneaking around. Around 10, Myra came into the office and asked if we were going out for a long lunch, and I told her yes. "I'll leave around 11:20 and get a room," she said. "That won't be necessary anymore. Lois signed the papers yesterday, so we don't need to try to avoid something that might not have happened." We left for the Marriott at 11:30. When the door to room 403 closed behind us, we jumped on the bed. As we were getting dressed, Myra asked, "What now?" "What do you mean?" "I mean now that you're free?" This caught me off guard, but it didn't take me long to come up with an answer to the question. "As long as you want me, honey, I'll be around, but eventually I'll want to find a wife. I liked being married." "What would you look for in a wife?" "She should be pretty enough, love me, be strong enough to put up with me, and be a pretty good cook." "I can cook." I stared at her for a second or two until it dawned on me what she was really saying. Then I said, "If you qualify for this position, I will move your application to the top of the list. However, there is one small stipulation. I will not participate in bigamy. She looked at me with a confused expression, and then it hit her. She smiled widely and said, "Don't worry, love, he doesn't know it yet, but Harold is history." Then a thought hit me, and Myra saw the look on my face change and asked, "What's the matter, kid?" "What's wrong?" "We just came to the point where we don't have to hide things from Lois, but now we have to hide things from Harold while you go through your divorce proceedings." "I could be wrong, but I don't think that will be necessary. I'll give him a choice between adultery and irreconcilable differences. I have enough evidence to prove adultery, and if I go down that road and say I'm going to let the whole world know, he'll probably quickly agree to irreconcilable differences." Harold is climbing the ladder at his workplace and dreams of a vice presidential position. The CEO is a fanatical born-again Christian, as are several board members. I don't think Harold's prospects would be that great if I blabbed about his cheating. It might mean a motel room for me for a week or two, but we know how to handle that, don't we? Myra's plan worked as she had intended, and she wasted no time in putting it into action. She called Ellsworth on my recommendation and set up a meeting for Friday. She asked Bert to drop 2 sets of documents, one for adultery and one for irreconcilable differences. At 11:45 on Saturday, just before the bank closed, she took half of the checking account, all of her savings, and 4 of the 6 CDs from the safe deposit box. She returned home, packed her things Harold had left to gamble for gold, carried them to the car, and moved into the motel room by 3 o'clock. She came home, made dinner, opened a bottle of wine, and, while she and Harold were eating dinner, informed him that she knew about his affairs, had PI reports on 3 of them, that she had had enough and was going to divorce him. She told him what she had done with the money and that she would sign over her share of the house to him. She thought this was more than fair, since her share of the house was more than she had borrowed from the bank. She gave him the divorce papers, told him what his options were, and told him he had until 10 o'clock Monday morning to let her know which path he wanted to take, and then got up and left the house, smiling because she had left Harold the dirty dishes. She was not surprised when Harold called her on her cell phone and told her he would prefer to go down the path of irreconcilable differences. On Wednesday, they met in Bert's office, and Harold signed on the dotted line. Myra decided to stay at the motel for the weekend to give time for the dust to settle, and then I moved her in with me, and we were going to live together until our divorces were final and then get married. Once that happened, we'd have another problem to deal with. Myra was damn good at her job and didn't want to give it up. The problem was that the company we worked for had a policy that family members were not allowed to work together. We could both continue to work for the company, but one of us would have to transfer. The problem was that the closest company facility we could transfer to was 90 miles away, and that didn't suit us. So we decided to lie. We just wouldn't tell the company we were married. Myra wouldn't change her last name and would keep her health insurance. We would do that until we got caught, if we did, and then Myra would quit and find another job. If she wanted to. She really didn't need to work, as I was very well compensated for what I did. She checked out of the motel on Sunday and was living with me by 3 p.m., and the next 2 months went by quickly, without any problems, and I started to relax and let my guard down. Big mistake! Lois called once or twice a week, and I usually answered the phone, primarily to get the satisfaction of blowing her off. I should have known she wouldn't stop bugging me. It was Wednesday night, and Myra and I were at the landing strip enjoying a toddy or 3. We stopped by there from time to time, and not always on a Wednesday, because it's always been my favorite establishment. But the main reason we were there that night was because one of the girls from accounting was going to perform and give it a try. We were there to cheer her on and give her moral support. Shelley was fine, but our opinion, mine and Myra's, was that she was better off sticking to her job and not trying to go into show business. She started with, "A man was sitting reading the daily paper when his wife came over and hit him over the head with a frying pan." "What was that for?" the man asked. The wife replied, "For the piece of paper I found in your pants pocket with Jenny's name on it." The husband said, "When I was at the races last week, Jenny was the name of the horse I bet on." The wife apologized and continued her housework. 3 days later, the man was watching television, and the wife came over and hit him over the head with an even larger frying pan, causing him to pass out. When the man regained consciousness, he asked his wife why she had hit him again. "Your horse was calling," the wife replied. After polite laughter from the assembled crowd, she continued. The old man and the woman had been married for many, many years, though they hated each other. Whenever there was a quarrel, shouting could be heard until deep into the night. The old man would shout, "When I die, I will dig my way out of my grave and come back to haunt you for the rest of my life." The neighbors were afraid of him. They thought he practiced black magic because there were many strange occurrences in the neighborhood. The old man liked to be feared. To everyone's relief, the old man died of a heart attack at the age of 85. His wife's funeral had a closed casket, and after the burial, she went to a local bar and started partying like there was no tomorrow. Neighbors, concerned for her safety, asked, "Aren't you afraid he might actually dig himself out of the grave and come back to haunt you?" The wife set down her glass and laughed. "Let him dig himself up. I've buried that old fart upside down and I know him well enough to know he won't stop and ask for directions." Like I said, all well and good, but she needed to keep her job. Bobby Denton was just introducing the next pitcher when I felt something wet splattered on me and heard, "Keep your damn hands off my man, you damn whore." I turned around and saw Lois come up behind us and pour the drink over Myra's head. Before I could get up and do anything, Myra threw her drink in Lois's face. Lois fell to the floor and I grabbed Myra and dragged her out the door. I had some rags in my trunk, and I got them out and was already wiping myself and Myra dry when Lois came out of the door. She was wobbly on her feet from hitting her nose with a beer bottle, helped by none other than my asshole cousin Ralph. I dropped the rag from my hands, yelled, "You rotten son of a bitch!" and lunged at him. He let go of Lois, who fell to the ground, and then took off running. I chased him for 3 blocks before I gave up and went back to the strip parking lot. When I got there, Myra had Lois pinned against the fender of the car, and as I walked over to them, I saw that Lois was crying and Myra was screaming in her face. "Get it into your stupid head, you stupid cow. I didn't steal it from you. You threw it away and I was lucky enough to catch it." As I approached them, Myra backed away from Lois and said, "Let's get out of here." "Get in the car. I need to go inside and straighten things out with Joe Lambert, who was the owner." I went inside, found Joe, and asked if there was any damage I needed to take care of. He said no and laughed and said, "Next time, do it during intermission so the customers have something to look at when no one is on the mic." When I returned outside, I found Lois waiting for me at the entrance. A quick glance showed Myra waiting in the car. Lois stepped toward me and said, "Please, Dave, give up the divorce. I'm dying, baby. I need you. I love you and I know we can work this out." "You must be the stupidest human being on the planet, Lois. Standing here professing your love for me while your beau for the evening is the cause of your divorce. Not only that, but you were stupid enough to pay attention to the fact that you were here together. You need to let it go, Lois. The only feelings I have for you are hate and disgust. Leave me alone." I walked around her, got in my car, and drove away. Both divorces became final. I proposed to Myra, and was surprised when she said, "Ask me again in a year, baby. By then, we'll have lived together long enough to see if we're right for each other." I gave it a year and then asked her again, and she said yes. We'd both had a big wedding before and didn't want to go through that again, so we settled on a civil ceremony and a justice of the peace. Lois married Ralph, but the marriage didn't last 2 years. It seems that Ralph shared with several other women, and one of them gave him a disease, which he in turn passed on to Lois. Obviously, cheating on me was acceptable, but cheating on her was another matter entirely, and she wouldn't tolerate anything like that. 6 years after my marriage to Myra, Ralph had been foolish enough to attend a wedding that I had attended, and I had fulfilled my long-standing promise to him. Perhaps it will be some time before I am